Welcome to this week's episode of Trista's Plate Story Podcast. I'm Trista Polo from iwokeupawesome.com, and I am your host. Each week we learn the story behind that vanity plate. You know, the one you saw driving down the road? What did it say? What did it mean? Why did they choose it? This week we meet Reverend Rob Toll of San Diego, California. Reverend Rob is a wedding officiant for all, so it makes sense that his license plate would be Rev Rob. Reverend Rob believes weddings should be enjoyable and customized to the couple. He has performed many different types of ceremonies, including socially distant ones. Reverend Rob is also a co-host of a podcast. It's called Biopics Mostly Suck. We talk about that too. Let's meet Reverend Rob, and I invite you to visit him at revrobsd.com and subscribe to his podcast. I'm really excited to have this week's guest with me. It's Reverend Rob Toll from San Diego, California. We found each other through Facebook, I think.
Yes.
And your license plate is Reverend Rob. Tell us about the background of why you chose that license plate.
Well, I started a business as an officiant that came out of being a public speaker and doing facilitation. And I realized I could put those skills towards performing weddings, which sounded like a whole lot more fun than being in a conference room with people who are yelling at each other. and all those same skills come into play. You have to be able to bring people on the same page. You have to be able to get them all pointed in the same direction. And you have to make sure everyone's there for the same purpose, which in the end is for the couple. And I never had an opportunity to get a vanity plate before. I always felt once I got one, my tastes would change into something else. And then I'd have some plate on my car that didn't represent something I liked anymore or wasn't into as much. And
like a drunken tattoo.
That's it. It would be like a drunken tattoo. And so I thought, this might be a good way to promote the business a little bit. I got the license plate RVND ROB, and an interesting thing happened. As soon as I attached it to my car, I realized I have to change how I am as a driver because I'm no longer anonymous.
That's right.
I mean, if you had some plate that was like skating with an 8 in it or something else, no one knows who you are. But when you have Reverend Rob on your car, they can put 2 and 2 together and find out who you are. So I became a much nicer driver. I became much more patient in my driving.
Started driving like a reverend.
And then I've had a couple interesting experiences with the plate where I was on a residential street and this guy was just tailing me. And I'm thinking, okay, there's nothing going on here. And we come to the next stop sign and he comes up on me and I'm wondering, what is going on? And he pulls around to my side on the next block and just yells, "Are you really a reverend?" I said, "Yes, I am." "Oh, that's cool. That's really great." And then he went off. So it does get some attention and get some interesting reactions.
I'll tell you that this just reminded me of a very random, very weird story I'm going to share. I was in high school. It was, afternoon, evening, and I was driving home in my car. And this guy kind of caught my eye at a red light. And the next thing I know, he started following me.
Oh.
And he's following me and I'm starting to get uncomfortable with it because at first I thought we were just going the same way. And then it was very clear wherever I turned, he turned. So I finally pulled into a very well-populated area and I rolled my window down and he pulled right up next to me. And he said, "Hey, how you doing?" I said, "I'm 16. He said, "Have a nice day." And he drove off. I think he thought we had a moment.
Here you're wondering why this creeper is following you, and then he pulls up next to you and confirms that he's a creeper.
He's a creeper.
Or
he was out for a good time and thought I was too. I don't know what he thought he saw in my eyes.
Oh my God.
But I was very glad that my age, put him off the scent.
Did he leave quickly?
He left very quickly, yes. Those were the magic words. I'm 16.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, thanks for bringing up that awesome memory. I haven't thought of that in years. Now, you as a wedding officiant, you really work to make sure people's vows and their whole experience is very custom. Can you give us some examples of some pretty unique ceremonies you've done?
Let's see. Every ceremony is unique. which is kind of the boilerplate answer, but because it's unique to the couple. And really that's what I work towards, is my belief is a wedding ceremony is really a representation of the couple. So what happens nowadays is a lot of times couples, as they're kind of getting used to wedding lingo and what's involved with a wedding, they'll say, what do other couples do? And the only answer I can give nowadays is whatever they want, because it has become so much more individual. I think what's happening is millennials are much less geared towards the traditional. And where this is coming out of, that I've seen, is really out of same-sex weddings, because a lot of same-sex couples are being very creative and very expressive about themselves in their ceremonies. And the LGBT population hasn't really had a tradition when it comes to weddings. So they're free to do whatever they want. They aren't held to what mom did or what dad did. And I see that spreading into heterosexual couples as well, where they aren't giving a second thought to having that, the groom having that platonic woman who's your best friend be your best person in the place of a best man, or the bride who has her platonic male friend who's being her man of honor, for instance. So it's really kind of blowing it out. Couples are allowed to be more expressive. But before they get to that, it's really having to understand what is involved in a ceremony. Because for some couples I've run across, the first ceremony they'll be attending is really their own. So what I do with the couple is we meet and I basically walk through their ceremony and I ask what is it they're looking for in certain areas. And that's when I can find out how familiar they are with wedding ceremonies. And by the time we're through all of that process, I understand what they're looking for, and they now feel confident and understand the lingo like recessional, processional. They understand how wedding ceremonies work, have that basic understanding, where now they can be creative. But where I've seen a lot of creativity is in unity ceremonies. And a unity ceremony is really just a visual expression of the vows that came right before it, which is it's about two parts coming together into a whole, whether that be the traditional candle ceremony in a religious setting, or whether that be a sand ceremony, which has become really popular because 99% of the weddings I have done are outdoors, and candles don't do well outdoors. So sand ceremonies have become very, very popular. But I had a couple where their thing was tea. They were really into tea. And what they did is at the beginning of the ceremony, they had the mothers come and put their types of tea that they like. I think the groom liked oolong and the bride liked jasmine tea, and the mothers combined those together. And then the fathers came in and poured the hot water. And as we did the beginning part of the ceremony, the tea steeped off to the side. So we did the intro, we did a reading, we did their vows, ring exchange. And then when it came time for the ceremony, we moved over to the table and they poured cups of the combined tea for each other. So that was a really lovely way to take what's a standard unity ceremony and making it individual for the couple.
Yeah, I agree. Although, how did the tea taste? Like when you mixed those two?
I didn't have a chance to try it, but they said it was good.
Okay, see, that's where my mind went. I'm like, oh, how did those two taste together? And here's all this symbolism and love and unity. Now, you're in San Diego.
Yes.
So do you get a lot of destination weddings, people wanting to come to your area to do the weddings there?
We do. And what's interesting is the destination ceremonies don't tend to be big, overblown affairs. They tend to be really simple affairs. I'll get contacted through my website or through email by a couple who's in Czechoslovakia or England or Germany. And they're saying, we're coming to San Diego. We'd like to do the ceremony. We'll do a video conversation. We'll walk through the ceremony. And then we'll just meet on the beach somewhere here in San Diego and just meet for the first time, do their ceremony, and have a good time.
I love that. How much of the local knowledge do you give? Like, we should go to this beach, not that beach. Do you give them some local advice since they're coming from Czechoslovakia or wherever? They probably don't know the best places to choose.
Yeah. And really what it comes down to more more than anything, I think, I mean, there's beautiful beaches in Coronado, which is an area out here in San Diego. And the nice thing about Coronado is they don't make you get a permit to have a wedding on the beach. Whereas the city of San Diego, any place you're going to hold a wedding outside, even if you're just getting together on the sidewalk and saying a few words together, they're going to charge you a fee for that permit. But the parks and beaches in Coronado, absolutely free. You don't have to pay to reserve them.
See, that's that local knowledge I'm talking about. You wouldn't know that if you're coming from my area, the Hudson Valley, New York, and going to San Diego. You would just assume San Diego, let's go to San Diego. So that's interesting. It's good that you have that local knowledge of the landscape that you can help people out with. You've started to do some distance kind of ceremonies, some socially distant weddings, I understand. Can you share me a little about that?
Yes, with the COVID-19, the coronavirus that's going around right now, I had a couple who had booked me to do their ceremony on April 11th, and that date was coming up. I reached out to them and said, with everything going on, are there any plans to reschedule? I got ahead of the curve a little bit, which I think was great because they weren't reacting to something. Now it was, you may want to look at this. So they did. They rescheduled in July, but the problem was their license was going to run out before July. So we got together and we did a socially distant wedding. We all reminded each other, we all kept watch on each other to stay 6 feet apart. And the funny thing is, when we started the ceremony, it was odd for me to be 6 feet away from the couple. I'm usually the person who's closest to them, usually even closer than members of the wedding party. But to be 6 feet away was a little odd. But the funny thing was, the couple also stood 6 feet apart to start. And I said, you both came in the same car. I don't think you have to, you have to stay apart. So, but yes, the maid of honor and the best man they had were also 6 feet apart. And then we had to do the license signing. So I had to figure out, how do we work all these different pieces in order for everyone to be safe? But we got through it, and it was unique and enjoyable. And I just had a couple reach out to me today for them type. So it's looks like I'll be doing another one here, and we'll just see how it goes as things change and move along.
I love that you can just get creative because you do things that are so custom. Have you ever done a Zoom wedding now that Zoom is so popular?
You know what? Each state has their own legal requirements for weddings, because when we talk about weddings, it's a states' rights issue. Some states say it's okay to do video weddings. California does not. So they say everyone has to be in the same room together, the officiant and the couple.
So you wouldn't be able to perform the ceremony because you're in California, is that right?
Well, not only because I'm in California, but it's all going to depend on where the license was pulled. So if their particular state says it's okay to do a Zoom wedding or a Skype wedding, then it's okay. But different states have different requirements for officiants. Some states say you have to lead a congregation. Other states say you have to be a resident. But a majority of states I could really fly to and go ahead and perform a wedding ceremony.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. Now, when I'm a friend or family and I am wanting to help out with the wedding, you offer some guidance in that way, right? You do some family coaching. Can you share a little about that? Because that's not something I even realized that reverends, pastors, ministers did.
Well, I don't think a whole lot of them do, but I read an article that said 40% of couples are using a friend or family member to perform their ceremony. And the first thing I thought of, because I'm a music fan as well, was, I don't know if you remember Napster in the music industry.
Yes.
Okay, so you remember when Napster came up, the music industry's response was to fight the change rather than see what they could do to be part of the change. And that's the first thing I thought when I read this article, because I haven't found another officiant who offers a consultation service for friend and family officiants. But my feeling was, if this is the way the trend is going, there needs to be someone there to help those people out. This is their first time, in order for the couple to have a really great ceremony. So I get together on the phone, I send the celebrant officiant to be a script that they can use, modify, customize however they like for the couple. And then we meet on the phone with the couple and we talk about what's involved in the ceremony, what works well. My biggest tip is this isn't funny time. A little bit of humor is okay. Humor in the moment is perfect and helps to facilitate the ceremony. But, don't try to be the jokester. Don't make it a roast because no one wants to sit through that. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
if you've ever been to a ceremony where that's happened, but it's painful to watch.
Yeah, and this is not a stand-up gig
No,
opportunity either.
not at all. That doesn't mean humor isn't appropriate in a ceremony, but when you do it at someone else's expense, it's really not the way to go. So those are some of the conversations we have along with the legal side, how to fill out a license, because the officiant is going to have to do that. And then really that's a service not for the friend or family officiant. That's really a service for the couple. So they can be assured that their wedding's going to go smoothly. But one thing I didn't realize, I was talking to a local wedding coordinator about this service, and she said, "Oh, I would love that. I can't tell you how many times I have seen this." So that's really my audience for it, is the couple or also wedding coordinators.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Tell me, what makes a good wedding officiant?
A good wedding officiant exudes calm. I found that's really one of the key things that I do on site on the wedding day. Everyone else can be panicking, but for the officiant, there shouldn't be any problems. And what's interesting is there's a certain authority that just comes with the role or the title. So from the very beginning, I don't try to legislate or mandate in any way. I don't think that's the role of an officiant. But the officiant should be keeping an eye on what are those things that are happening before the ceremony that are going to detract from the ceremony. For instance, I arrived at a country club, and the groom and everyone wanted to buy the groom a drink because the groom is usually mingling around while the bride is sequestered somewhere else. So the groom's mingling around. I saw the groom with a beer in his hand. I went and said hello. And then I said, "Oh, my unsolicited recommendation, you might want to save that for after the ceremony." And he goes, "Oh, okay, that's a good idea." And then as I was wandering around the country club before the ceremony, I would periodically hear, "No, the Reverend said I can't have anything to drink." So you just try to help things move along smoothly and help everyone to be at their best.
I love that. You had mentioned the 3 rites of passage
Mhm.
in life. Can you share what that is?
Oh, absolutely. 3 rites of passage are birth, marriage, and death, and you only have control over one of them.
Well, that's for sure.
Yeah.
That's for sure. I have an online shopping business, and I work with a team of people, and our team name, if we're doing an accountability or something, is Team Dash. And
Okay.
the reason for that name is because you don't have control of your birth date.
Yep.
You don't have control of your death date. But if you look at the tombstone, there's that little
Mm-hmm.
dash
Yeah.
in
Oh, there you
between.
go.
And that's the piece you can actually create for yourself. So to
Yeah.
not ever forget that dash is what you're working toward. So tiny, but so important.
Very important. And control itself is fleeting as well.
Yes.
I've never been a fan of this, your perfect day, your special day. I found that, I've done ceremonies where things went wrong. I had a bride almost light herself on fire during the candle ceremony
Oh my.
because they used an old candle and the wick was buried in the wax, and she was just damned and determined to get that thing lit, and her veil was hanging over, and
Oh my
it was
gosh.
almost a disaster. And that's just part of life. As the ceremony's happening, someone's going to miss a cue, or you have the ring bearer who's 3 years old who decides to wander the opposite direction of the aisle, or you're doing a wedding after there's been a rainstorm and the bride's standing there getting dripped on, but she's not saying anything. So control is an illusion many times. And I think the couples who realize that you can't control everything, you have to roll with the punches, are really the couples who are going to go forward and have the best marriages, because That's what life is all about, as I think we're all realizing in this time of coronavirus.
I totally agree with you. I have to just share my wedding. I had that same philosophy. I'm about to be married 24 years. It's
Congrats.
imminent. Thank you. And we had so many things that went differently than, I won't say wrong, although at the day I did, but I won't say wrong today with 24 years of perspective behind me. It rained and we were supposed to do the ceremony outside. And a friend of mine, a really, really, really wonderful friend of mine came. We were friends in college. She and her boyfriend broke up during my wedding. I didn't even share all of them with you. There were so many different things that happened. But here's what happened the moment before the whole wedding started, is I realized and decided that everything that I could have done to prepare for this wedding was already done.
Yeah.
Before all this happened, thank goodness, I went through this little conversation with myself in my brain. And there was nothing else I could do, because now it was actually the day, and I was determined to enjoy the day to the fullest and not have to worry about what's going right and what's going wrong. So I just sort of left it to whatever was going to happen. And so even though things happened that weren't as planned, I had the best day. Yep. I had the most fun day. And I think it's because I just gave up the control, yes. gave up that yes. It had to be perfect. And so anything that did come up, I was able to roll with the punches. Now, you also have a podcast, so I want to make sure we talk about that. So yes. What is your podcast?
My podcast is called Biopics Mostly Suck. And what we do is we tell the true story behind movies based on a true story. Now, one thing you always hear about biopics anytime someone fact checks them is, oh, it's just a movie. Oh, it's just for entertainment. But I think there's a certain responsibility filmmakers should have in not straying too far, because there's a part where I think that the ethical boundaries bend a little bit. We just recorded an episode on the movie Frost Nixon about the interviews in 1977 between David Frost and Richard M. Nixon. And it was really interesting to dig into the history of those and to find out what really happened, and then to find out how those were transferred into, well, first a play medium, because it was on the stage first, and then into a film medium. So we find out a lot about history. We talk about ethics. We talk about reasons why liberties might be taken in presenting historical information into a film medium. And it's a really interesting conversation. We do it in a conversational manner, like here. I do it with a good friend of mine, John Helix, who's a local musician. And we just have a blast doing it.
That's awesome. I love that. And thanks. So you did the Frost Nixon. What are some other episodes what are some other biopics you've covered?
Oh, the one we most recently released is Saving Mr. Banks. That's the story about Walt Disney and P.L. Travers. Yep. And unfortunately, they didn't get past P.L. Travers as a child, but she was a fascinating woman. Really, really interesting person. And it's really interesting what really happened when she was there at Disney Studios as well. We've also done Bohemian Rhapsody. We went back to 1992 and did the movie The Doors. We did Rocket Man. That was a fun one to do. That was a lot of fun. And we keep chugging along.
I love it. My husband and I, we have a zillion DVDs, because back then you would buy DVDs, and I always loved to watch the director's cut. Yes. So you could watch the movie 1,000 times, and then the movie well enough, you can watch the director's cut and not be annoyed that the director is talking over the actors in every single scene. But I just always found it fascinating. Like one was Pretty Woman, and the story where in the scene, I just love those kinds of extra nuggets. So I think what you're doing in your podcast is brilliant, because I can watch a movie, love the movie, be really intrigued by the story, wonder how much of it was real, probably never get around to researching it because I get busy and go on to other things. But by listening to your podcast, I can just hear kind of the nooks and crannies and backgrounds and extra little nuggets about the story. So I think it's great. And you do most of the research for those?
I do all of the research. I love doing research. I love learning new things. And without the podcast, I would just tell any friend who would listen because I was researching it anyway. And now that I have a podcast, I have more friends who can listen. So it's more enjoyable.
I love that. I love that. And so is there anything that you want us to know, how we can access your podcast or anything else you have coming up?
Absolutely. So we're on every platform out there. It's Biopics Mostly Suck. The mostly is parenthetical because it's not all biopics. There's some really good ones out there, but Biopics Mostly Suck. Your favorite podcasting platform, we're out there. And then Reverend Rob, you can find him at revrobsd.com.
So I always like to turn the tables and invite you to ask me one question. Do you have a question you'd like to ask me before we wrap up?
Oh, I sure do. So I'm a big fan of music, Trista. So I wanted to ask you, what are your top desert island discs?
Here's what I'll say about my music choices. So first of all, any music I can dance to, I'm in. Okay. Even if it's a funky beat. Well, actually, I'm just going to go and look and I'll tell you. My most commonly listened to music right now, it's in a playlist I call Self-Love. So everything in it has to be positive. It has to promote positivity and strength. And, women who, go for it. So I have a lot of Meghan Trainor in there because she's poppy and she's got interesting beats and interesting rhythms going on. And then, of course, you have to have Happy from Pharrell Williams, Shake It Off from Taylor Swift. Let's see. Girl on Fire, Alicia Keys. My very, very favorite thing right now, though, that really gets me going, it's called Good to Be Alive by Andy Grammer.
I don't know that at all.
Oh, it's got, you know what it is? It's a story of feeling like everything you've tried to do has not worked. And the next thing you know, it is good to be alive because everything's in your favor. It's all turning out the way you had hoped, and it's better than you could even have imagined.
Wow. I'll have to check that out. Thank you.
It's a good question. I wasn't prepared at all, but luckily I had my phone handy, as we all do. Oh my goodness. I've had so much fun chatting with you, Reverend Rob.
I have too, Trista. Thank you. This was a joy.
Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of Trista's Plate Story Podcast. Please subscribe to Trista's Plate Story Podcast to get the story behind all those vanity plates driving with you on the road. And if you would like to nominate the owner of a license plate, including you, or visit any of our partners and sponsors, come see us at platestory.com. That's PL8STORY.com and give us the details. If you enjoyed this episode, please drop a review and give us a share. I'm Trista Polo, wishing you well on the road to your next adventure.